Welcome back to our second episode this week of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales. Thank you all for joining us this week. Did I say second episode? I think it's actually, what day is today? Wednesday. It's our third episode. I am losing my mind. It is the holidays. It's a very weird time for work and everything else, as most people are trying to wind down for the holidays. We seem to be adding more and more episodes. That's because we have access to so many amazing guests, especially in the state of Florida. I'm really excited about today's guest. I'm a big fan of the company. I'm really excited to talk to him. The last guest we had from this company was one of my favorite conversations, so no pressure. Folks, I am very excited. February 6th is going to be the annual C-Lab conference. I'm so happy it's actually happening. We should have most of the MMTCs participating. A lot of your favorite C-Lab speakers will be there. I will be there all day live streaming. What an all-day live stream means, I don't know yet, but we're going to figure that out. We're going to be there talking to all the great guests, everybody who's prominent in Florida and then some. Check that out, February 6th. It's going to be at Sacred Space down in Miami. You can get your tickets at joinclab.com. There's going to be a virtual component. Bear with us as we figure out exactly what that's going to be. But as soon as we have that done, we'll let you know as well. Folks, as always, recorded episodes, if you want to check those out. Last week, we had Becca Allison, and we also had Mike Simpson, two amazing episodes, an awesome vaporizer device, and of course, the VP of marketing for Parallel and Satura. You can find that at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. And then, of course, we have 3 more episodes with a potential 4th coming next week at facebook.com/cannabusinessgroup. So with that being said, my guest today is a newer face at one of the MMTCs down here in Florida. And I'm very excited to talk to him because they are one of my favorite. They're very Florida focused, and they're in a few other states. I want to talk to him about what they have in store for Florida, what the future looks like. Obviously, we've got rec potentially coming in 2022 and so much more. So with that being said, my guest today is Robert Beasley, CEO of Fluent Cannabis. Robert, thanks for joining us.
Hello. Hi. Thank you.
Thank you, man. I know you were a busy guy. We caught you on a long journey home, so I appreciate you having the conversation with us tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm trying to make it home for the holidays to see some family and have a somewhat odd COVID-safe Christmas.
Yeah, I understand that. But you guys have done a great job handling COVID in the stores. You've been getting the patients of Florida their medicine, so I commend you for that. Robert, you're just, I want to say more recently the CEO of Fluent, but you've been a staple of the cannabis industry for a very long time, having a lot of different positions and really gaining a lot of experience. And all that started with your work as an attorney. So how did you, obviously I have an idea of how an attorney gets into the cannabis space, but, what was your initial foray? Was it something that you sought out or did it seek you out? Because I always see it's either one or the other when it comes to the attorneys.
Right. It kind of sought me out through my work with drafting and advising on the legislative process. The process in Florida had several legislative attempts, all of which failed. And then through John Morgan and his group, they pushed through a constitutional amendment. That constitutional amendment had several work sessions in which I was involved in. Following the success of the amendment, there was a statutory drafting process in which I was asked to provide input in through various interest groups, and then a regulatory process, which I was asked to provide input in. And over the course of those multiple scenarios, you end up becoming the quote leading expert in what the rules will do and do not say. Following the issuance of the rules, there was the successful award of 7 applicants in Florida initially, and then some of those applicants reached out and needed advice and consulting. So I became a consultant on the rules and regulations of Florida, flowing from my work in the legislative drafting process.
Very cool. I mean, I would say if you're going to hire someone to lead your company, someone who helped write the laws, if you will, or consulted on them, is certainly an amazing option. After you helped with those amendments, obviously having that knowledge, you have the ability to monetize it, but in the form of monetizing it, you're also helping build an industry down here in Florida. How did you start getting more involved? I saw that you were involved with processing facilities, helping build cultivation facilities. Obviously, you're the CEO of Fluent now. You've been on the board of a few other companies, I think CBD and hemp, as well as one of the cannabis physician groups down here. So was it just the fact that, hey, I have this knowledge, there's a lot of people who need this information, let me help build this industry in Florida?
Well, the initial consulting work was going through the application process and then going through the startup in Florida. When the original applicants received their license, they had a series of check marks and benchmarks to make under a set time. Well, the landscape was very new. A lot of the regulatory aspects was new also. There were certain requirements. For instance, the liquidity requirement at the time was $5 million. The statutory scheme pre-selected a group that was 30-year nursery owners. Well, 30-year nursery owners are typically the grandsons and family legacies of people who started nurseries. And they usually had hard assets, but not a lot of liquidity. So early on, when I asked to consult, I also was asked to try to find some interested parties in investing. I, at the time, had a commercial real estate practice, many different commercial real estate developer clients. And so some of my first clients that I reached out to were hotel developers, real property developers, and said, "Are you interested in getting in this business?" And then I became more than a consultant. Now I had obtained financing, I had obtained capital funding. Um, when that money became in play, then those clients who really were not cannabis people, who really were new to the old concept, asked that I then stay on board and take charge of being a good steward of their money. That led me to go from a consultant role to a manager role to a board member to the chairman of the board and manager of one of the first licensees. I then took that licensee through the build out process. Following the sale of that licensee to a publicly traded Canadian company, the calls just started coming. More people started asking. I was asked to develop projects across the country. When a good idea would come in, first in the cannabis space, then later in the hemp space as hemp became more popular, and those projects were being developed, I was asked to lead on the development of the project, starting up the company, organizing it, getting it in place, and then turning it over to a management team. So I did that several times throughout the country for various investors.
Very cool. I mean, that sounds like a hell of a way to build experience. So you founded your firm in 2001. Here, 19 years later, did you ever think that you would be the top dog at a cannabis company? I mean, I can't even imagine that was on your radar when we hit this new millennium here.
No, in fact, I'll confess, I lack the street cred of some CEOs in this business because I was not a user. I just recently received my card, and so now I'm a legal user. But through a lot of this work in the early days, I was not as familiar as a consumer of the products. I knew the laws, I knew the regulations, but in the startup of the early cannabis days, most everyone who was a quote expert was an expert by on the job training, use, and they had come out of the black market, if you would, as far as retail sales. I had none of that background, and so had to build my own street cred when it came to cannabis knowledge.
It's interesting because there is that religious argument against quote unquote corporate cannabis just because of the word corporate, right? But when you look at it, if we really want this industry to mature and be taken seriously, there needs to be some kind of corporate aspect to it. I don't mean it in the negative sense of the word that people use, but if these companies want to grow, thrive, succeed, become cash flow positive, it's a heavily regulated industry. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to make it. And I'm not just saying in Florida where we have to have big companies because of the way the license is, but even in places like Oklahoma, where licenses are being printed like the government's printing stimulus money, right? It's
Right.
if you don't understand the regulations, if you don't understand the rules, and then also when it comes like for real estate transactions and things like that, those can get very complicated. Business structuring, all this stuff, you I feel like there needs to be a good mix of quote unquote corporate and cannabis people for the right for the right opportunity here, because you want the cannabis folks that are going to help you stay in touch with the culture, make sure your product is good, make sure your SOP is on the grow and everything else is there, understand what's going to attract people to your product. But we need more corporate folks too to say, okay, how do we structure this business so we can become profitable and be here to stay as everyone's favorite cannabis company? I'm sure given your background, you kind of agree with that statement.
Yeah, and that's been the struggle because, as you said, culturally, traditional cannabis growers and cannabis artists, as I call them, they reject big business, big corporate, and those notions. And simultaneously, as boards become more populated with individuals out of the finance background or banking background, they've kind of shunned cannabis-based artists, and so you have these two cultures colliding. But the facts are these: in Florida, at least, it's a fully vertical company, which means that it is a cultivation company. So we have an indoor agricultural operation, which is a large enough scale to compete with any agricultural operation in Florida. Then we are a manufacturing facility, which involves some fairly detailed and in-depth processing. As we move into BHO and the other methods of processing, we become, more and more in depth in processing safety and so forth, because we have more volatile processing scenarios. So we're a manufacturing company. Then we are a marketing company. We are a retail sales company. And so when you're truly vertical, it's such an interdisciplinary approach that the true cannabis person, the cannabis craft person, and the artist, it's well outside of their scope. At the same time, if you start at the top end and you have these executives that have come into and they followed the money into the space, the art of growing and the art of cannabis and the culture of it is totally missed by them. So somewhere in between, you have to develop this interdisciplinary appreciation of both sides of the equation, and that's been my struggle over time. As I go from state to state, and I've set up operation after operation, I have to start to put those pieces together, because a lot of the cannabis artists that I have seen, the growers, the really true good growers, they're just not sophisticated business people. They're not running. We're effectively in Fluent as an example, we're running $100 million company with in Florida 24 retail outlets. That measures up to any other fairly major company. That's big business. So, like it or
Yeah.
not, can't turn that way.
No, and I agree. And what people don't realize is, as long as we keep the soul of the cannabis industry, there's nothing wrong, right? Because folks that come from the outside the cannabis industry, there's not necessarily that they weren't cannabis folks. They just never had the opportunity to be so. When you're a lawyer, when you're a financial advisor, when you work in some of these other areas, you have licenses and you have things that you can potentially lose because it's federally illegal. So you don't have that opportunity to be a cannabis person or be someone who's out of the closet about their use, right? Paul Rosen is someone that we talked to from PharmaCann who's like, I was a user, but I was also an attorney, a practicing attorney. So, I could get disbarred. And that's something that we've seen. But we also have the fact that cannabis seems to be more accepting than other industries. And then you get the people, like, if Harborside wasn't successful as one of the first dispensaries, you wouldn't have a Steve D'Angelo who found the Last Prisoner Project. He's doing Last Prisoner Project because his bills are paid, right? He has the ability to focus on a nonprofit. He's in, the third or fourth act of his career. You've got a big company like Candescent that is giving 100% of their profits for justice joints to Last Prisoner Project. If their bills weren't paid, their investors certainly wouldn't be that happy about them giving away stuff for free, even though it is for a good cause, right? So it gets to a point where these cannabis companies are able to give back, and they have to grow big enough to get there. So I 100% see your point, and I'm glad that we have this intermixing of quote unquote corporate people and cannabis culture, because I truly believe that's how we move the industry forward. I'm making some assumptions here, but I imagine in this industry, the entire management team really works together harder and more closely than a lot of other industries. Whereas you might have a really knowledgeable CEO on that vertical or in that industry, and then have other people who are experts in their field. Whereas you had mentioned all the different type of companies you have to be as a vertically integrated company, that you almost essentially would be like a supervisor over a group of CEOs. And that's how the management team is kind of built out, for a horrible analogy.
Right. And when it's vertical, like Florida and other states, and just true vertical, and some states are not vertical, so it's not as difficult. Um, you end up being divisionalized, and the CEO just really kind of keeps the divisions in order and keeps them all singing to the same page of music, because there's so many interdisciplinary specialties, that you really honestly have to bring so many people together from different walks of life and different backgrounds, that you have to start becoming divisionalized, in order to be functional. Now, it's not as hard. Some of our states and licenses, we're just doing retail or we're just doing cultivation. And that's a little easier, because if you can just focus on one segment of the cannabis market, and not be truly vertical, then it's a little easier. There are arguments on back and forth on vertical, non-vertical, and why you should or shouldn't do it. I understand both sides of the coin, and I'm not trying to get into the debate on that. I'm just saying that practically, when you're truly vertical, you have to be more divisionalized. And quite frankly, the retail and finance component needs to stay out of the cultivation. They need to leave those artists doing what they do. Let them talk to their plants. Let them have the relationships they need, and just stay out of their way,
I
because they have no business being there.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's where we find the harmony between the two. And candidly, I don't think there should be a debate vertical versus non vertical. I just don't think that vertical should be forced, right? If you have a really good group that focuses on retail and they're badass retailers, let them retail. There's no need for them to get into cultivation or distribution or anything else. Maybe they just understand how to market to the end consumer, right? So, and I think in any good business, vertical integration is something you either work towards or end up achieving out of necessity for margins or things like that. So, I had no doubt in my mind that there was going to be many vertically integrated cannabis companies across the country. I just don't like seeing when it's forced, right? And I
Right.
imagine some of those companies feel the same way. um, in Florida, we have to be vertical. But having said that, we've got some really good companies here, and obviously we see that because you're expanding into other states. So at this point, where is Fluent operating on your website? I see Florida. I see one dispensary in Hanover, Pennsylvania. I see that you're operating in Texas, which I know is a very strict medical market. And then I saw recently on a press release you're in Michigan as well. Did I cover everything there?
That is true. I took the CEO seat in September, and prior to that, I was special counsel to the board. So I was advising the board and really translating a little bit more about what we were just talking about. Our board is a great board, but they are from different walks of business life. They bring different specialties to the table, none of which are cannabis specialties. So one of my jobs for the first 9 or 10 months was just translating what was going on and inside the company to the board, and acting as that go-between. But one of the things this company was doing is very similar to what you saw with MedMen and everybody back in the gold rush. Was they were in a horizontal expansion mode. So they picked up Florida, they went and picked up Texas, they picked up Pennsylvania, 3 licenses in Pennsylvania, then Michigan. And that's a good solid basket of assets and an awful lot to pay attention to. But then they went and they picked up Canada, and they went to Puerto Rico, and they had some South America stuff, and they went to Australia, and they really stayed in a horizontal format, which was pretty typical because it was a gold rush, and it was get more licenses, get more licenses. My entry upon the scene at Fluent represents an investment in the vertical structure of Fluent. For instance, we've always had 3 licenses in Pennsylvania for retail. Our Hanover, Pennsylvania store is a phenomenal store. The number's outrageous what it does, and it's in just Hanover, Pennsylvania. There's no particular socioeconomic drivers there that would tell you that you'd have a great store there, but we do. But the other 2 licenses have sat dormant for the last 2 or 3 years. So I have a store in Mechanicsburg now about to go under lease, and I'm citing a third store because vertically investing out, developing out these assets is part of my program. Same thing in Florida. Florida, we were putting on more stores and more stores, but when I did an evaluation of the company, it was really cultivation capacity that we were missing. Inside of a vertical format, you have an inherent supply and demand matrix, with the stores being the demand, the cultivation being the supply. And we were off balance. We did not have the cultivation needed to maximize the sales in the stores. So the drive to put more stores on the ground was the more visible showing of progress, but we don't sell stores, we sell weed. So we need to grow
Yeah.
more weed, be able to populate those stores. So what I'm doing now is vertically investing in the assets as opposed to horizontally expanding. In fact, I've closed down Puerto Rico. We've let that asset go. We closed down the Canadian operation. We're kind of retracting a little bit and focusing on developing on what we have. What we have is plenty. I mean, Florida is a big state, and Texas is a big state, and Texas is coming into their legislative session. What has stopped Texas from being a successful cannabis business model is the legislation. There are 3 or 4 components of their legislation, very typical of a southern state easing into cannabis. They did it, but they didn't want to do it to the degree that caused it to uh, have all these idealistic negative consequences, none of which have occurred in any state. But the idea was they tiptoed into it. And now this legislative session, Texas hopefully will cure some of the issues that they have that's roadblocking a successful model in Texas. Otherwise, we have a very small footprint there. We sell through delivery, and we're just idling essentially until the legislature corrects some of the issues that prevent growth. So that was Texas. Michigan, we have a cultivation license. Michigan's a red hot market. There's not enough product in the state of Michigan. So we are growing only. We do not have a retail presence, not really seeking a retail presence. And we're going to expand from an outdoor to an indoor grow next year in Michigan and continue to be a provider of high quality flower in that state, as well as biomass. The state is underserved entirely from the cultivation side. It's again, if Michigan were vertical, it would have the same wobble that we have in Florida, which is they have more stores than they have product. And so you see that often where someone, again, we talk about the interdisciplinary approach. Someone comes into the company and says, well, we need more stores. Well, sure we do, but we have to have product to put in that store. And that's what you see going on statewide in Michigan right now. And so that's kind of the assets we're working on. We just opened our 24th store in Florida, which was Fort Pierce. But other than that, we closed this year with 24 stores. I'm going to hold on opening more stores. I have 4 new stores cited, but I probably will not push to open them until Q2 or Q3. And that is because we have an expansion of cultivation coming on board at Tampa. We have a new facility at Sweetwater, Florida, being open to sell to target high quality flower. I'm really disappointed with the quality of flower in Florida. And the Sweetwater facility is small batch rooms, going to bring out some old Florida strains and try to increase the overall competition quality of flower in Florida. So those are our focuses, and that's how we're going to grow.
Very cool. I had to look up where Sweetwater, Florida was because I've lived here most of my life and had no clue, but apparently
So
it's outside of Miami.
No, the Sweetwater facility is in Zolfo Springs, Florida, and it's about an hour and a half dead in the middle of the state, down from Tampa. It's right across the Peace River. It's out in a very strongly inhabited citrus area, and it's an area that has embraced our presence because of the recession of the citrus market. They're looking for some new agriculture, and so the community there it's in Hardy County, I believe. They have been tremendously supportive of getting our facility online. We got DOH approval 2 days ago, I think, and we brought plants in. We're bringing plants in either yesterday or today. So we're looking at a March market time for the new flower product. And what that facility will do is roll out high quality flower, one batch at a time, as opposed to producing, a high volume of fairly mediocre quality flower, which is what you kind of see in Florida right now, to be honest with you.
And guy just got his card. He's already a hard critic. No, I'm just kidding, obviously. So big fan of the location. I know actually about where it is. I don't know if you're a golfer, but there is the Stream Song Resort, which is about a 30-minute drive from your grow. So there's a small part of me might leverage my influence as a podcaster to do a golf trip and see a grow tour of the high quality flower facility. You might be seeing that email coming in the future.
You're welcome to come down. We'll do 18 holes, and if you'll excuse my golf game and not tell anyone how terrible I am, then we'll zip over and you can do the tour.
We might have to do the tour first if you're the same level golfer as me. But no, man, that all sounds awesome. And I love how you talk about that. There's a big push in this state to open up retail so you have the footprint. But when you go online, and we don't need to call anybody out, and you see that they have one or two strains in stock, it's not inviting, right? Because like you said, it's an undersupply and you're your own supplier. So it's interesting to see a store that would have 10, 20, 30 plus stores, but they have very limited supply. And, they talk about new strains and everything else, but we all know that I don't want to say no, but the assumption is as companies are opening up new stores, that's where the better stuff's going because they're trying to win market share in that area. So someone, for me, who's been in an area where a store has been for a while and they announce a new strain, the chances of me getting it's like the COVID vaccine. It's going to go to everybody else first before it gets to me. So it's really nice to hear that there is a focus on cultivation. So when I go to go to the Fluent website, I mean, at last I looked, there was at least 80, 90 products available in Lake Worth, which is the closest store to me. And that's exciting, right? And that's what you want to see. So it's really, it's awesome to hear that. Talking about the plans that you guys have, I was reading an article today. I mean, you guys are poised for a phenomenal future because you're in two of the top four markets or what they're assuming are going to be the two of the top four markets for 2020. So 2020 is not over, but number 3 was Michigan. This was on Motley Fool put it out. Number 1 was California, 2 was Colorado, 3 was Michigan, and 4 was Florida, which to me, I posted on my LinkedIn, was so impressive because if you think about it, we have 454,000-ish, give or take a few patients in Florida. And they said that for the Florida market will be $1.2 billion in sales. Michigan was $1.21 billion. And then listen, we all know, although Texas is strict right now, when they greenlight Texas is going to be gigantic. In my opinion, especially, I know how dumb this sounds, but they've got Rogan there, and Joe Rogan was hanging out with the governor of Texas. I can't imagine that there is some celebrity influence while Rogan's sitting there. You know government better than me, but Rogan, who just signed a $100 million check with Spotify, who's going to say, hey, all my comedian friends that make tens of $millions a year are going to move to Texas and you're going to get their income tax. I think they might start, lighting up Texas soon enough. So with those 3 states, I can't imagine what the future looks for you. I'm sure this is all part of your plan.
Well, and Texas is going to be exciting because hopefully, and I've started talking to the lobbyist over there, because I have been involved in the legislative process. It will not take much. There's a few little aspects of the Texas legislation that could be changed that would really open up Texas to be able to provide the product to the Texas citizens and the Texas patients. And all of it now, all of these changes that need to be made, extending the list of conditions, providing an other category, increasing the amount of concentrate that they permit, and then disconnecting the one rule they have where you have to have a cultivation center to have a retail center. So if I wanted to have a store in downtown Austin, I'd have to have a greenhouse behind it attached, which is very difficult to pull off. But we can make those couple changes. And what the legislatures of Texas can do now is they can look to states like Florida, and we hope to bring them a bunch of data and to say, look, here's with these conditions, here's what works, here's what doesn't work. And so now, having tiptoed into the market and ready for an expansion of their legislation, they can look at real good science to show and to support their next legislative change. And that's a benefit that states like Florida and other early entry states didn't have. It was the Wild West. I mean, everyone was guessing a little bit about what would actually happen socially, economically, and otherwise.
If and when it passes in Texas, Austin, Texas is going to be one hell of a town. Some of the best food in the country. I mean, I would certainly look to open up dispensaries next to some of the barbecue joints. Maybe if the line from have the line from Franklin's pass by your storefront.
Absolutely, yeah. Austin would be the first place I would go.
I might be, once that changes, I might be sending you a resume. Barbecue and cannabis sounds like a hell of a plan to me. So Robert, we've been talking mostly about the serious side of cannabis, but you ran a law firm for a very long time. It's a much different position. Besides not having to wear a tie every day, how do you like being the CEO of a cannabis company? It's got to be a hell of an experience.
It is. What I like about it is that it's interesting to everyone. Even people who have no interest at all in taking the medicine, or and who have distanced themselves either, from some moral approach or otherwise, or just lack of knowledge. Even those people, it's very interesting to them. It's exciting. It's the new frontier of business, and so what I find is, unlike my law practice where no one really cared to talk about the law, and neither did I. The minute it comes out that I'm a CEO of a medical cannabis company, the questions just start rolling, and that's exciting because then I get to be an ambassador to the cannabis business and the cannabis industry. And having come from the background that I do, I think it causes people to maybe give it a second look. There's been quite a few people that we've started. I mean, I was a trial lawyer for 20 years, and so I know how to debate. I know how to engage in a discussion, and do so without being controversial or hostile or anything. But there's been quite a few people I've started the discussion with, and then by the time we end it, they're like, "Yeah, maybe I should see if I could get my mom to do this, or I could see if it turns out my sister really needs this." And so I'm converting people through the dialogue, and that's super exciting. It's interesting because I believe in cannabis as a medicine. I understand that it has a recreational use also, but I'm now convinced. Having not been a user, was not a user, I am absolutely convinced that it is a medicine, and it is actually just a shame that it was suppressed for so long through the years of prohibition, because it's a very valuable medicine that can take the place of some other way more harmful medicines like opioids.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, my wife worked in the addiction world for when we first met for a while, and you hear the stories with everybody else. And, I agree with you. It's funny when people talk about the cannabis industry and just dispensaries and everything else, all they think about is the recreational side of it. When then reality, that's going to be one of the smallest parts of it. Yeah, you're going to be able to go into a dispensary and buy flower and buy pre rolls and everything else along those lines and concentrates, and people are going to use those for recreational purposes, but there's going to be a much larger population that uses it medicinally, whether it's to treat an ailment or from something that this country doesn't do, proactive medicine like vitamin, and using it from a wellness standpoint. And we know the benefits of cannabis and CBD from that standpoint. We can't technically advertise them or talk about them that much. I mean, I can because they have a shitty little internet show. You're the CEO of a publicly traded company, so I'll take that bullet for you. But it's interesting to change somebody's mind and have that conversation where it's no, it's not just about smoking a joint. It's these tinctures, it's these creams, these edibles. You can take a 5 milligram edible and it can change your life throughout the day. And the only difference between that edible is it's cannabis versus a pill that some pharmaceutical company told you is okay. And you don't know what it does to you. You don't know, you have less idea of what's in it. At least with the edible, it's cannabis and maybe some sugar and some other things, depending on how it's made. Right. I mean, it's
Right.
funny. My mom to this day, and I probably shouldn't call her out on this, but it's fine. She takes some CBN/THC capsules, right? She's a patient in Florida, and she still has it in her head that it's a pharmaceutical. So, if she has a cocktail or anything else, although cannabis does affect that, she's thinking it's the old, don't drink and take painkillers or Advil or anything else like that. So it's really funny to see how people's minds are trained in this space. So I couldn't agree with you more. Kind of circling back towards the future, there's a potential. Florida has the potential to go full rec in 2022. Now, obviously, it needs to be voted on. Legislation needs to be passed. Our state, and I'll be the one to say this, seems like it's stuck in time based on the Flora Grown case, that nothing's really changing or coming down the pipe. As the CEO of a company, do you have to take that into consideration that essentially about a year from now or a little more, that this could be a full recreational state? And do you have to prepare for that coming down the pipe?
We do, but we prepare for it in the same way that we are preparing for the current demand. The fact is that the medical demand in Florida is still exceeding the supply. We don't have enough store coverage between the companies that are in Florida. We do not have enough cultivation space. We don't have enough product on the market. It We need to do the same things that I was just telling you about to increase cultivation, to get more product out there. Now, all that rec will do is increase that demand more, arguably, but it will also possibly increase the demand for certain product sectors. I have, in my own opinion, some products are more of the derivatives are more rec products. You have the high potency products, the shatters, the crumbles, the rosins, all of the real high potency stuff is kind of more of a rec based product, although there is a medical use for those. So we'll see a shift in product segments and SKUs, and we will see a tremendous more demand. And so we have to keep doing the same things we're doing now, which is growing. Back to the business side of this, um, we can't bank. We don't have a banking possibility, which means we can't get money like I can't get the money and access to banking and resources that another $100 million company could get. And what that does is it really chokeholds capital, which chokeholds growth. If the one thing that I could ask for on my Christmas list would be not a decriminalization at the federal level, but descheduling and opening up the banking for the cannabis industry. Allow us to bank like normal companies. Allow us to have access to capital at a reasonable rate of interest and a reasonable rate. That would allow us the growth that we need, and that would be my Christmas wish for this year. Maybe
That
maybe
would be
Santa Claus Biden will provide it for me.
here's my uneducated opinion is along those lines where I don't know if I want to see federal legalization yet, right? And there's a reason for it. I want to see cannabis companies, I want to see the banking system open up to cannabis companies so they can operate like normal businesses. I would love to see that. Descheduling, fine. Let's work on the nonviolent offenders and things like that. But the reason I don't want to see federal legislation yet is because I feel like it's going to mess things up. Not that our federal government has a reputation of doing things correctly the first time, but there is not right now. We have basically the opportunity to have, I think, there's 35 or 38. There's a lot of legal states, so let's just call it 40 for the sake of argument, because
Right.
I don't feel. How many is there? Because
39.
Okay, so I was off by one. I was hoping you didn't know the actual numbers. So 39 states. We have a potential for 39 different case studies right now on how to do this correctly. And if you ever had anybody who's smart in the government to be able to sit down and analyze the data and look at these 39 case studies and take the best from all of them and come up with the best federal plan, that's what I'd like to see. I just with at the federal level where there's still being, when I say a religious argument, I don't mean it in the literal sense of the word, but just a belief argument. I just don't see it going well in the first, maybe even second iteration of federal legalization. Now, that is a completely uneducated opinion, but that's kind of how I feel about it. I'd like to see the states continue to develop their markets before we look at federal. Now, having said that, that could put us behind on an international scale where the US could be the world leader in cannabis, just because why not? I mean, California did more revenue than all of Canada.
Right. And it's okay to just deregulate or decriminalize and open the banking up at the federal level and not do anything more, as 39 states then becomes 40 to 45 states, and there will always be holdout states. Ultimately, the rational conclusion will be it's decriminalized, and then the federal government just turns it over to be a state issue. It's just a state regulated issue, and that'll be different than the way other items are regulated. But what's going to happen, and what's already happened, if you think about the time now that California's been in the business, and some of the West Coast states, and now Florida, it's a robust regulatory program at this point. So they're doing it on their own. They actually do not need federal oversight from a regulatory point of view. They just need to relax some of the restrictions and decriminalize it to where these companies can operate. I mean, I want to add to my Christmas list, by the way, we need to get rid of the 280E implication, because these companies are paying close to 62% tax on their revenues. And you're talking about a provision of the IRS code that was meant to catch Al Capone and all the other mob members back in the day, and the cannabis has been swept into it. So it's hard to maintain a business, if you think about it, where you need massive amounts of capital because you're vertical. You can't borrow it from the bank, and then you have to pay 60% tax on your revenue. It's a very tough way to do business.
I can only imagine. So it's going to be amazing 10, 15, 20 years from now, the case studies that come out of this industry, the massive consult. I mean, I honestly think if you can run a cannabis business, there's probably not a business on this planet you can't run with all of the hurdles that are in front of you. It really is incredible. So I know you're in the middle of a trip home, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Looking towards the future, Florida is becoming a very interesting place. We're starting to see West Coast brands make their way to the state, via licensing deals and stuff. I'm really interested to understand at this point when you're vertical and you're still producing the products, I don't want to say what is the attraction, but how do you balance the decision to develop, say, in-house brands with the potential for wholesaling them in the future versus bringing in some of these California brands that have name recognition to bring more people to your store? I imagine that obviously more margin and more control over in-house brands, but the appeal of some of these West Coast brands and their SOPs and everything else are also very valuable. So how do you kind of manage the decision of, okay, where are we going to bring in from the outside versus what are we going to develop in-house?
This is a conversation I have 3 or 4 times a week, and it's one of my most delicately put conversations that I have, because I end up with one West Coast company or another who are exceptionally successful on the West Coast, wherever they are, California, Nevada, somewhere out there, and they're really a big fan of their brand, and so what they want to do is their brand on our shelves. Now, it's in logo restrictions we have. As you may know, our flower packaging and edibles packaging is more restrictive than our vape cap packaging. So set aside all of that for a minute, because that conversation's easy. The hard conversation is this: there's not a brand allegiance in Florida. And so when these companies come in and they want us to pay them, 10, 12% or whatever commission for their name, then it really doesn't stick. And that's disappointing for them to hear, because they're a big name somewhere else. Um, but the second part of that that's difficult for us is what I told you earlier. We can't keep inventory on the shelves. Our inventory time is very, very short. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's very short. And the amount of time from that piece of inventory that comes off the truck, goes on the shelf, and then goes into the consumer's pocket is very, very short. And so literally my products are flying off the shelves. The question then becomes, if I have a vape product and I'm selling it as fast as I can sell it, what benefit to me is there of bringing in another brand name vape product? I can't sell it any faster. And I'm just paying a commission to them for their name. And their name isn't really that sticky yet in Florida. So it's a tough conversation to have. Now, you mentioned SOPs and IP. That's the part, West Coast is a good bit ahead of the East Coast and a good bit ahead of Florida. So there are a lot of techniques, there's a lot of innovation out in the West Coast that is attractive. And so if we meet with a party that has something more to offer other than their name, then we can have a conversation. But right now for us, if I'm going to pay you 10 or 12% commission on a product with your name on it, and it's sitting right next to my product, now I'm competing with myself inside of my own store. You're not going to drive more customers to me, because I'm selling more than I can stock anyway. So it's a tough dilemma right now. Those names do not add a lot of value right now in Florida, um, because we're undersupplied. And so if we start getting more supply out there, more competition, the names start developing their own Florida followings. You get a little carryover following from the West Coast, but Florida's a young market. It's an immature market. A lot of our users are not, they didn't move here from California. They're first time users. And so some of the names that are real popular out west just haven't stuck here yet. It's not a national branding scenario. It's a state branding scenario. And so those are tough conversations I have a couple times a week. And I feel like I'm calling their baby ugly, and I'm not. I'm just telling you, I don't need to pay you a commission for your name, because it doesn't really sell more of my products, and I'm selling all I can stand anyway.
Yeah. It's funny. I have this conversation, at my day job a lot, and I kind of agree with you, right? I think you have the opportunity to create your own brand here that's going to be Florida based. I mean, if you look at your logo as well, you got the FL highlighted on it, right? So it is very true to Florida. I definitely agree with you in that sense, but it's interesting to see what's going to happen in Florida and honestly in every market, seeing these brands expand. Because like you said, there's no loyalty unless it's tourism loyalty. And it's really interesting to see. There's a lot of ego in cannabis. And I think unfortunately this year and potentially the next one, there's going to be a lot of egos burst in this industry as we start seeing consolidation and everything else, and a lot of these little companies potentially going away. But listen, I've taken up a lot of your time. Before we let you get out of here, let's website, anywhere where people can place orders, anything else you want to promote before we let you go, and we can let you get back on the road.
Yep, just getfluid.com, pick your location, pick your store. We have real-time updating of our inventory there on the website. And so if it's on there, we have it. And try our edibles. We were first in the edibles market. That was my man on the moon mission. When I took the chair, I said, we're going to have edibles out by October 13. And we did. We beat the competition by weeks. We're keeping the edibles fresh by mixing new flavors and bringing out new ratios and such. So you need to try our edibles because we're the market leader right now.
So I have this weird obsession with, for some reason, calling out an awesome food place by the dispensaries that I like. So I'm going to go to the Lake Worth Fluent, check out the edibles, and then I'll be hitting up Tacos Al Carbone after. I told Oz about that place. One of the best taco places in the state of Florida, right down the street from your dispensary. So really excited about that. Robert, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Folks, thank you everybody at home. This has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. Of course, you can check out the Cannabis Lab annual conference on February 6th to get your tickets or to attend that. For more information, join clab.com. Of course, if you missed any part of this interview today, it'll be live on our YouTube page on Monday. You can check that out at www.youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. Please give us a like and a follow. And of course, we'll be back with 3 fresh episodes for you next week right here, facebook.com/Cannabusiness Group. It's been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. We're out.